Okay, this will not be, okay, got it. I see. All right, well, I think I'm good to go.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, thanks very much. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining. And it looks as though we're actually broadcasting. And so I want to thank you so much for joining today. My name is Deidre Patillo, and I just feel like I need to start the session off being a human being. And so I just want to say hello from San Antonio, Texas, and the University of Texas at San Antonio, Small Business Development Center, Center for Government Contracting. I'm very proud to be a part of the Southwest Texas Border SBDC network. And I welcome you this afternoon to talk about some lessons learned from COVID-19 in regard to disaster preparedness. Now, while I'm pulling up I'm going to say goodbye on camera. And while I'm pulling up my presentation, I just want to share with you one of the key lessons that I have learned in regard to disaster preparedness, business continuity, emergency preparedness, whatever you call it, is the importance of not trying to completely recreate the wheel with all of your activities. And so, to that end, I am going to utilize some training that we have developed in the Southwest Texas Border SBDC network for small business emergency preparedness to walk through some of those lessons learned rather than recreating the wheel, which sometimes in the early days of COVID-19, it just seemed like everything was so on its head, so upended, that we had to do everything new and different. It was a great way to make myself crazy. I feel like one of the greatest services that I can do is to have some continuity and standard. The real. I'm sorry. I think that perhaps somebody's okay. I think we're good now. I'm sorry. Microphones. Another lesson, a big lesson learned, I think we've all learned during COVID is to go with the flow when it comes to technology. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape. I know for myself, being able to say you're muted, or could you mute yourself politely, definitely makes my time go better. So one of the things, as I mentioned, that I learned is trying not to recreate the wheel constantly. Provide some continuity in terms of the resources that we have aggregated over the years here, that we have found to be useful, and then make them relevant. Make them refresh them for our current purposes. Because, and as I tell clients all the time, hey, please build on things that you already have, and let's maybe find something we can edit rather than recreate. And that's kind of how I look at disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness, business continuity, all of those great words. Whatever leads you to think about how you could be more resilient tomorrow than you were yesterday. And so as we look at these tools today, one of the things I want you to know is you will have access to the presentation as well as many of the tools that I'm going to refer to today beyond this session. My understanding is they should be at the bottom left of your screen. If anyone has any issues with getting any of the tools today, feel free to email me, and I'm going to put my email address in the chat box. And I hope you will use the chat box as well. I thank you very much for, I see that some things have populated in the chat box. Please take advantage of those materials and feel free to download them, but also feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. So it looks like people are already using the chat, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to be checking back when I can, referring to any questions that you have. And thank you so much for sharing your, personal experience, Jason. Definitely when the pandemic struck, we did not believe that it would still have the impact that it currently has. We were certainly looking at a shorter time period, like we've looked at other types of disasters. So I think if we think about lessons learned in light of what we can do better tomorrow, and I always say, what can you do in blue sky? And the reality is we've been living in some fairly gray skies for quite a while now, and many of us, continue to see those. But I always think that there's something you can learn and move forward and do better. And so let's dive into some of these materials, and feel free to put some questions in the chat, as I mentioned, and I will do my best to address those, or you're always welcome to reach out to me beyond today as well. Just a little bit of legalese. This training is brought to you by the Southwest Texas Border SBDC Network as a public service. It is not designed as a substitute for legal advice, nor is it a comprehensive statement of the law. When I put my HR hat on, because that's what I am, I'm an HR subject matter expert for our network. I often tell people I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on television, but I want to try to direct you to the most effective resources that we can find. And I will certainly recommend, when you need legal assistance. Today, what we're really going to talk about more is a strategy of business continuity. But I think if you will, consider all of these in light of the activities of your business and the needs of your business, you can't go far wrong, and you're likely to be compliant with any regulations you may be obligated to, and of course, engage in defensible actions as well. One of the tools that we have developed in conjunction with some of our SBDC partners from across the nation is this Ready for Anything checklist. And that's one of the PDFs that you can download as well, the Small Business Emergency Preparedness Bifold brochure. And I believe it's a great starting point for conversation, and it's a handy tool to look at where you are now. I think that sometimes when people think about preparedness, they feel overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, how could I have prepared for this? What could I have done? And I think we've probably all have had experiences that we felt fairly successful in some of the efforts we made, some of the responses that we had. And that's really what we want to do. We want to try to shape a very healthy response and take those lessons that we've learned when something didn't work. What were the resources and tools that we needed? When something did work, what can we build on and leverage? I think it's great to start with a conversation in your business. And I really even say this, if you are an organization of one, just start to think, how can I eat this elephant one bite at a time? Where can I break down to see what I do have as well as what I need? I think it's a great thing to have a conversation about, what are the things that could impact your business? Why do you need to prepare? And where can you start? Where can you find those resources? Well, absolutely, your local SBDC is one of those resources. I tell my SBDC colleagues all the time that they are business continuity professionals, and some of them gulp a little bit at that, but it's true, because anytime you are spending time working on your business and not just in your business, you're engaged in a business continuity activity, in a strategic activity. You're engaged in understanding the key inner workings of your business to help make it more resilient. What we call the Ready Kit, I think, are just some ways to break that elephant down. Take it a bite at a time. Find an item. I bet you everybody, even in their personal life, probably already knows how to access some of the information that we have on this list. If you've done something, you give yourself a check mark and a pat on the back, and you say, next. What can I do now to make my business stronger? So that's a tool that I hope that you will utilize. And now we're kind of talk about the key elements to help you break down that plan a little bit more as well. So since 2004, I've had the good fortune to be able to meet business continuity professionals, safety and disaster subject matter experts, and just attend a tremendous amount of training and research on this topic. And I've seen everything from, the 13 steps, to disaster preparedness, the 10 pillars of, safety and business continuity or risk management, all these other things. And I would say, depending upon your industry, the number of employees you have, your location, your specific, the geography of the community where you're located, you may need a very, very specific emergency preparedness plan. It might be guided by regulatory authority. It might be guided by past experience, certainly the lessons that we have learned in the last year. So I cannot say that there is one plan that will absolutely fit every single business. But in my experience, these 4 elements should help shape anyone's plan, and certainly should be included in any kind of risk management assessment tool or strategic plan for disaster preparedness. So this is what I am going to talk about today. I think this is just a simple concept or philosophy of emergency preparedness that any business of any size can employ. They can also then incorporate it into maybe more extensive plans, certainly that might be more industry specific, activity specific, equipment specific, geographically specific. But I think that these concepts can help anyone feel that they are getting their arms around emergency preparedness. We want to know the who. How do you develop a planning team? And what is it we need to mitigate our risk against? How, what are the hazards we need to recognize? How do we make this living? How do we develop an emergency plan? And when? How do we make this timely and real and relevant to our ongoing activities? And by doing all of these things, by examining the who, the what, the how, and the when, we have a virtuous cycle of emergency preparedness that leads us to business continuity. And that's what I want to break down today, how anybody can engage in these activities, and what are the lessons that we have learned in relationship to COVID. So when we think about the who, when we're thinking about establishing our planning team, there are some questions that we can ask ourselves. I'm not going to read these slides to you, but I want you to think about some key elements relevant to these questions. When we're thinking about how many people we need, and we say, that's kind of easy since I'm an army of one. I'm a one-person business. Well, then we need to break down the roles and responsibilities relevant relevant to the plan. If we need to think about, do we have internal or do we need to count on external responders? What type of authority and autonomy have we granted to anyone? And how do we keep this living through a succession plan? What's going to happen? Jane's been the chief of, all of our physical plant issues, and Jane won the lottery and ran off to Tahiti. Who's replacing Jane? Is it the same role? Are we looking for skills? Is it in the position description? There's a lot of different questions to ask. And also, when we think about, who will be advisors, that is a really important part of the who you have to count on your planning team, because we rarely operate in a complete bubble. We are usually engaged with other entities in the community, other businesses, etc., and they may have an impact on our overall business continuity. So really, sometimes when you start to, this is one of those first bites of the elephant, you really may feel like it is all on you, and yet have the opportunity to find other resources. In thinking about how this relates to COVID, I know that I would say that probably one of the lessons a lot of us learned was, how to call on technology to manage some of the activities we had previously been engaged in, or needing to call on technology to do so. And so we really, there's a lot of things I think that we can think about. I know also that there are some great tools from ready.gov, for example, the business continuity plan, and you'll be able to follow this link directly to that site. And ready.gov is a great site to bookmark, by the way. We can see one way of breaking down the planning team, or thinking about the authority, autonomy, succession needs of folks involved in our emergency response process. And I think that we probably all had some experience of, looking at our org charts, or, just communicating with our staff and finding out, that there were people who were not available in the ways that they may previously have been available before the pandemic. So one of the lessons learned is really being able to clearly understand what folks' roles are, their responsibilities, who has authority and autonomy to accomplish certain tasks. It's really important to be able to get your arms around that when people might very suddenly be unavailable in the ways that they have previously been available. So not only does looking at these types of processes from a business continuity standpoint, help guard against risk in the future, it helps us understand our functionality better now. And I do think that a lot of us have found out ways in which we maybe weren't utilizing technology in a certain way, or thought we couldn't. And we got a better understanding of who we work with, and when and how, and different ways that we could work with people. I know that we were all probably, whether we were all communicating remotely and maybe using something like Teams, or folks who were meeting in person and making sure that they could still communicate effectively about whether or not they were able to meet in person. Really understanding about who you need and when you need them. Looking at these kind of organizational tools can be helpful, not only for the future, not only guarding against future risk, but better understanding what you're doing now. And by establishing certain guidelines for the team, getting them to issue a statement of purpose, which we'll talk about when we talk about the emergency plan itself, establishing a timeline, providing tools for the team to use in organizing the preparation and examining processes. And when I say identifying costs, we don't want just to look at, do we have a monetary budget for this, but how do we assign a time budget as well? And I think one of the lessons, that we have learned is, time has moved very differently. There were things that we thought had to be done in a certain amount of time, and for a variety of reasons, they weren't done in that time. And what did that really mean to our overall functioning? So when we think about the lessons learned, let's see what did happen. what did happen, who was available, and what are the commitments to time that we could make in order to examine some of the risks in our business, more effectively for the future. Some of the keys to that team, also making it real and living, are making sure that there is management, direction, and obvious buy-in. And so it's not so much about it being top down, it is about it being engaged. Now, some of those methods of engagement I think should be a little bit more formal, like a written commitment from leadership, but also with a written commitment back from the team, and include the expectations in job descriptions. This is also a really great way to establish accountability, and also to clearly outline expectations. When folks know what to measure themselves against, they are more likely to be engaged. So as we think about the who, there's a lot of great tools to use. Using ready.gov, asking yourself these questions, looking at the strategies and directives you already have in your workplace. That can be a great way to make sure that you are putting together a team that can move your plan forward. So then we talked about what is it we really need to mitigate against? What are some of the factors that will help you recognize risk? Well, I think one of the things that we probably learned from COVID is that one, we did have some tools to deal with that we may not have, really fully utilized prior to the pandemic. And yet we probably also found some, lapses in our regular functions or our ability to functions. And Jason, thank you. That is a great comment about the winter weather disaster and how that affected many businesses. And what my experience was for, lessons learned from COVID was the folks who had pivoted to be able to quickly provide some of their resources virtually. I'm thinking a lot about, I had a lot of like therapy client, business owners with various kinds of therapies who had already explored the ways that they could deliver their services virtually. And that was fine unless the therapist didn't have power or internet, or the client didn't have power or internet. So some of those tools that we had developed, had vulnerabilities. And so that's always an important lesson to look at, if the pandemic had never occurred, then of course, we would still have had the same vulnerabilities, from the winter weather, but we might not have so easily thought that we had a method of pivoting that might have a vulnerability. So, I mean, it's a really, really, great point that there are still other disasters that can take place. And just, like even folks who may have had electricity and internet may not have had water, and that can make, complicate your availability. For some folks, maybe in the same way that COVID complicated their availability, just because they had other things that they had to deal with. And so as we're looking at all of these potential hazards, this is where we need to take the lessons learned from what our experience was and kind of try to capture what our true vulnerabilities are. So I want to share with you, and you received 2 samples of vulnerability analysis tools. One is a simple Word doc, just like you see here. I believe FEMA first started sharing this perhaps even in the 70s. This is a really simple exercise that anyone in your organization could engage in, and it's simply outlining a hazard, assessing a probability. Of course, if you've experienced it, we would say that's a high probability. If you haven't experienced it, we don't want to just automatically grant it a low probability. We need to really examine and see if we can get some information about its probability. And then we want to assess its impact as well as our resources for responding to those impacts in order to get a score that helps us focus where we spend our time. So another version that was was provided to you is an Excel spreadsheet. I was really fortunate to have a great colleague who was highly skilled in creating Excel spreadsheets, because I absolutely believe that it can be easier to edit something than create it from scratch. And it offers a number of prompts on hazards to consider in looking at what your particular vulnerabilities are in your business. So it would be a great exercise, I think, and we'll talk about this again. And see, all of these pieces and parts kind of flow together when we talk about training and review. What are you learning, and what can you take forward and improve for the future? And so what I would say when we think about, the lessons learned, certainly, any of our any folks that we know in our communities who've been impacted by hurricanes probably have a clear viewpoint of what particular outages, shortages, losses, et cetera, are likely to impact them. They're also going to have a probably pretty good viewpoint on the impact. But if we haven't experienced those things, for example, I've had some folks tell me, this past winter is the first time I've ever lost water, first time I've ever lost internet for more than an hour, first time I've ever lost power. So a lot of folks have had some experiences that they can contrast and compare, where they did have resources versus where they didn't have resources. So I really think the what is going to be unique to your business and your circumstances. But there are experiences that, whole communities have that are likely. And I think what's important often is when we look at some of these hazards, when we really break those hazards down into what kind of specific hazard had an impact, we might see that there's a real reason for this business, for example, to focus on what happens when they lose power and they have a supply shortage, because those things could happen aside from a hurricane. I know that a lot of people, I think just this morning we had folks talking about supply shortages that are related to the pandemic, and then may have gotten complicated by other world situations, such as the barge being stuck in the canal, and other kinds of shortages. There may be production shortages related to the pandemic, complicated by other factors as well. This is where you want to be a little bit of a historian, not only of your business, but certainly of the area you operate in and your industry as well. I think that it's been a year, a little more than a year, of course, of all kinds of lessons learned. But I think what we need to do is see what was novel, but where were there vulnerabilities that could occur aside from this very novel experience for most Americans of the pandemic. So the what is going to be unique and particular, but I think no matter what tool that you use, you're going to learn something about your business. And as I said earlier, anytime we're working on our business and not just in our business, we are engaged in business continuity. And we're going to learn something that won't just help guard in the future, it'll help us understand better how we operate now. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this, because what I really want you to know is that we've got some great samples. I offered one Word document sample, but there are also resources from the Texas Department of Insurance, from OSHA, all about the different types of safety plans and emergency preparedness plans that you could apply to your business activity. But there are some things that I definitely think that should be included, and those are largely around directing your team to understand what the plan means to your culture. So from the plan statement to outlining responsibilities, we want to make this real in our organization. I would say one of the things that folks, did tell me about COVID were, the things, because again, I'm the HR specialist, I had a lot of folks really looking at their employment handbooks and saying, we are finding a lot of gaps. We really had not clearly outlined our leave processes. When new issues came up, such as the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, and so a new regulatory responsibility arose. We had a lot of folks really looking at existing processes and needing to understand them better. I think if you spend time developing a plan, and again, this is not about writing a detailed operations plan for every possible contingency, but it is about setting a standard for the responsibility for engagement in response. So we want to talk about what those general responsibilities are. We want to provide directions on response procedures. Depending upon your business activities, those could be very detailed. I am not talking about dropping a giant manual in for everybody to read, but we want to at least refer out to it so people know where to find the resources to understand their responsibilities. And I do think it is really important to include a promise to review and revise the procedure. Keep it living in your organization, because it's real easy to create something and let it gather dust on the shelf. But if we want something to be functional and living, we need to make promises, we need to outline expectations, and we need to set a timeline to keep it real. So as I mentioned, one of the documents that you can download is a sample Word document. Like I said, it's so much easier to edit something than create it from scratch. And you can use this just as a guideline. I caution folks against just doing a search and replace of your company name, because it really should be language that is relevant to your employees, relevant to your activities, and has a use for everyone in the organization. I also think it should be reflective of any existing policies you have, certainly around communication in your strategic activities. But if you haven't had a formalized version of those previously, maybe this is the first step in formalizing maybe some existing policies. I would say everybody has probably learned something this year about communication, about whether it's communication with your team, whether it's your communication needs with other entities, from those that you do business with, those that provide service with you. And all of those things can be used to be, directive on how you maintain your culture, elements of your marketing plan, all of the ways that you engage with your team and with your community as well. And I think that an emergency plan, because by its nature it is talking about risk mitigation and looking forward, is a strategic activity. And so we want to make sure it is assigned to folks who need it, who have responsibilities. We want to make sure that if there are elements of the strategic plan that potentially impact ability to respond, that we're referencing those things as well. And so we've talked about the who, the what, and the how, and now we want to talk about the when. And when do we need training, practice, and review? I would say always. Well, okay, maybe not, but I would say it needs to be top of mind and it needs to be real for everyone. One of the challenges that I see in many, many businesses is people really don't think about when they hear something as a drill, they don't think about it as being an opportunity and a tool to learn something about their own responsibilities, about particular vulnerabilities. But I certainly do. When we think about training, practice, and review, we want to make it a regular part of our activities from the outset, whether it's orientation of new employees or ongoing education of all of our employees. We should make various kinds of safety and activity drills real for everyone. We need to hold folks accountable because we learn things about our business and we learn things about human behaviors when we do drills as well. For different groups, it could be tabletop exercises. This might be a particular activity of your organization that you sit down and you really try, to kind of run through an example of, what are looking at what the potential risks are, posing a particular disaster, and assessing what your resources are. Evacuation drills. I always have to share this story when we are normally at the University of Texas at San Antonio downtown campus. We have a 4-story building that a few years ago they provided us with a, a sled chair to help individuals who might have mobility issues get down the stairs if we have to evacuate. And I'm a pretty substantial person, and I was really surprised to find out the first time we ran a drill with this that I really was not able to manage helping somebody in that chair by myself. Mostly because I'm vertically challenged. And so we found out some things about using this tool. It's great to have a tool, but not if you can't use it effectively. So evacuation drills are important for everyone, and getting feedback from everyone on how they were able to participate and if they experienced any barriers in participation is really, really important. Functional drills, not only, physical plant functionality, but activity functionality. I can tell you, going back to Katrina and various other disasters I've helped small businesses with since, Hurricane Dolly, Hurricane Harvey, some of the severe weather storms, fires and floods, even just in individual businesses, functionally what a lot of businesses find out that some of their backup systems may not work the way they expect them to. I think just a couple of years ago with some coastal flooding in the Corpus Christi area, I had a client who called and told me after attending the session that they'd gone back and they wanted to run and see for sure if they were able to download some data and reinstall their software. And it was point of sale software, and they actually found a pretty significant vulnerability because the way they were running the backup somehow didn't speak to the updates in the software. So functional drills, encouraging folks not just to think about, okay, yeah, we have these backups, we've had them in place for years, we'll just move forward with that. We really want to make sure things work. And thank you so much for sharing that there are wonderful disaster relief networks, such as the Austin Disaster Relief Network, that, it sounds like it really provides some, great support to the community during disasters. And I think probably all of us have found, that there are agencies and resources in our communities, and let's absolutely share them. That's great to know. I think that, we are, here in San Antonio, I'm not always thinking about the hurricanes until I start thinking about, all of my friends and colleagues and business owners all along the Gulf Coast. And so we all need to be thinking about vulnerabilities and engaging in some of these activities. When I say a walkthrough drill, this might be something that's more of an activity for the planning team to just kind of, be walking through the facility or walking through processes on a regular basis, making sure that they're addressed in some sort of plans or that they are being examined for planning and vulnerability analysis. And of course, there's always the possibility of engaging in a full-scale exercise. This is, it really depends upon your organization and what it is you need. I was just reminded recently of one of the most amazing full-scale exercises that actually occurred in November of 2006. And I remember it because I was in the Valley for a conference. And in the following year, there were folks who told me how they, were so moved and had tears in their eyes when they experienced trucks and buses coming from the Panhandle, driving down, to McAllen to do a full-scale exercise of evacuating the valley. And so that was in response, to Hurricane Katrina and all of the lessons learned there. I think that right now there are probably, some even full-scale exercises we could do that might, be, functional. Maybe it's not having anyone, not looking at disaster response from illness or injury, but, there are full-scale exercises that we could engage in when we get our plan plans complete when we are incorporating them into strategic activity as well. There's some other great questions to ask the team and ask your entire team. Ask anyone involved in your business, about how your plan really works, how it's relevant to the activities of your business. I think that there are some tools that you can build on from here, but also adapt from other resources. The Texas Department of Insurance is a great resource for finding information, simple checklists, many single page safety tools that anyone can use. And when you engage people in safety activities, then they might give you feedback on whether the right person is assigned to that activity, whether they know of others who might need to be informed of the plan. And all of this leads to, takes us from, just mere preparedness into business continuity. So thinking about the who, the what, the how, and the when, and what are the lessons learned from COVID? Well, I go back to my thought that I don't think we should absolutely recreate the wheel. I think that we should look at the tools that we already have. I know we've heard the word pivot today. We can see where we can pivot or where we can leverage, and finding out about organizations that are engaged in some of these activities. That's a great question. Do organizations like Chambers of Commerce have a role in helping with preparedness and the support for aftermath? So, that's a great question. I think it probably depends upon the community. I know I've seen a lot of communities that certainly have hosted various types of disaster preparedness events, business continuity events, having everyone from, safety specialists, to risk management specialists, maybe even in the insurance industry, speak about these topics. So I believe everyone has a role. I think that whatever organization you are engaged with, in the community, asking them about the resources and support they may offer, or asking them to offer support, and maybe offering them support as well. I think that one of the lessons we have definitely learned is we have to reach out to our partners, even those, if there are folks that we may have already been regularly talking to, and if we haven't heard from somebody, we need to reach out to them. We need to see what resources are, what have they experienced maybe as barriers to delivering their services in our community. And one of the things I always say about the Small Business Development Center, if you are a small business owner, or if you are a agency or entity that supports our communities in any way, you're part of the economy, and we need to hear your questions, because every question is valuable. Every question tells us something that is going on in the environment that we need to understand. And now sometimes those questions we've got easy answers for. We're like, oh yeah, we got something, we got some training, or we've heard about this that's going on in that community. And if not, we can say, oh, that is a need. Is somebody else fulfilling that need, and we just need to put these two parties together? Or do we need to examine the possibility that we need to respond to this need? And to that end, I say every single question is valuable. And I know that I'm going to find out how I capture all the information in this chat today, because there may be some questions I'd like to delve into further, and I do appreciate all of that. I want to share with folks, in addition to the resources that were shared that you can download, you are always welcome to go to our Small Business Emergency Preparedness page, and you'll be able to follow this link, where I've kind of gathered some of the things that I think most Texas businesses and entities need to utilize. They need to know about the Governor's Office of Emergency Management, the Division of Emergency Management, that has some great resources, including a checklist for building a Go Kit that's valuable for everyone in your organization. The Texas Department of Insurance, I think, continues to refine some of their messages so that they can do. I think one of the things that COVID has helped them to do is really look at making sure that their their messages are accessible, and they've broken down some information they've had into the before the storm and after the storm information. There's Texas Ready. Of course, there's the U.S. Small Business Administration information, and also you can always, search for current disaster declarations. But remember, that's one of the things your local SBDC can help you with as well. Another resource that we host at the University of Texas at San Antonio in the Southwest Texas Border SBDC Network is SBDC Net, or the SBDC National Information Clearinghouse. But our team there created this Ready for Anything page that has links to all sorts of organizations, from the Red Cross, all of the federal agencies that have resources, as well as they've kind of kept up to date with some specific tools to help small businesses in managing preparedness and responding to disasters. I'd like you to know that we also have a business recovery site where we've been aggregating information that has focused primarily on COVID and responses to COVID. I'd like to call your attention in particular to our cybersecurity tools, and that's certainly a really important part of keeping your business safe. And we also have a Back to Business handbook that's available from that website as well. So I want to get to some of the great comments that have been in the chat, and I thank you so much for sticking with us today and talking about, I'm going to go ahead. What Jason says, people tend to think of FEMA, but is a federal resource that tends to respond late as it takes a disaster declaration. That is absolutely true. And I will say that understanding what the resources are in a community and being able to respond to your community leaders and provide information that they may not have about your particular vulnerabilities and your business needs. I know with the winter storm that happened, especially, in some rural communities, that maybe community leaders weren't quite as aware. Again, it may have been because just inability to get to some way to communicate about the issue. With leaders in the community. And so lessons learned from the winter storm while we were going through COVID. And if there's another lesson I could say is one of the things is that COVID was not the only disaster, that occurred in this past year. And at any time, of course, there could be multiple disasters that impact, a particular business operations or, the community as a whole. So if you think about all of this information, not just in the bubble of your business or your organization, but also is, where do you fit in the overall economy? And that's what we're here to help you with. I thank you for this time. I will say that I normally spend a lot more time on this topic, so I appreciate you letting me race through it today. I thank you for your time. I hope to hear from you beyond today, and I will definitely welcome any email, any thoughts that you have, any needs that you have in your community, because it's something I'm very passionate about emergency preparedness. I'm very passionate about helping people to find their strengths and leverage them, and not letting people beat themselves up about any of their vulnerabilities, but instead trying to find resources. And so I think that ultimately that's the lesson that we continue to learn, is that there is tremendous resiliency in our communities, and sometimes we just need to break it down and be able to organize it into a more effective plan. So thank you so much for your time. And let's see, I think I know how to stop this. And so I hope everyone has a great rest of the conference.